Hey everybody, it's Mrs. Clones back again, and this is Constitution Regents Review. This is part 2 of our Regents Review. Just want to remind you that our good friend Starry McStarpants is going to help us out with multiple choice, and our other classic good friend Larry the Pencil is going to help us out with essays. So where we left off, we were saying that the Articles of Confederation, not good, that the Declaration of Independence was helped out by Enlightenment ideas, and that it wasn't no taxation without representation, that they were opposed to taxes. They wanted the representation. All right, so now here we're back, and so they've written the Constitution, and so, well, they have some issues, first off, even writing the Constitution. So the first thing is they sit down and they're saying, all right, well, we need to revise the Articles. They realize that's not even possible. It's just total and utter junk. They need to get rid of it. So as they sit down to write the Constitution, they realize there's sort of people with different ideas about how the government should be created, and so they have to make a lot of compromises. Sometimes they even call it the bundle of compromises. And so the first thing we have here is the Great Compromise. It's great, like, great, yay, but it's more great as in big. It was a big deal that they were able to make this compromise. And so what it did was it created a bicameral legislature. And remember, we talked about this, that bi means two. So it's a two-house Congress. And so the two houses, you'll never guess, are the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Representatives, which we're going to talk more about what both of them do in a little bit, but the House of Representatives, for the Great Compromise, they said, all right, that the number of people per state is going to be based on population. So if we look at it today, the state that has the most representatives in the House of Reps is California, because they have the biggest population, whereas, say, Montana or Alaska, they don't have very many. They only have one because they have a very small population. And so this was something that made the large states happy, because they felt, oh, this is good. We're going to, have more power because we have more population. The Senate was created to make the small states happy, that everything would be equal. So even if you're a small state, like we just said, like Alaska having small population, they'd be on equal footing with big states like New York or like California. So 2 per state. So everybody's equal. The thing you need to know, though, and I'm going to mention this a bunch of times, is that originally when they created the Senate, they were elected by the state legislatures. They were not elected by the people. And that's very important. They ask that a lot in multiple choice. The way you'll know if they're talking about today or if they're talking about back then is they'll say the authors of the Constitution or the founders of the nation. So if they're saying the founders of the nation, then we're saying, oh, it was elected by the state legislators. If they're talking about today, they'll kind of say today. Another compromise that they make is the 3/5 compromise, and this is our fun racist compromise. Fun, obviously, being sarcastic. So they're trying to deal with this population thing, and so the northern states that at this point everybody did have slavery still, but had less slavery. They're saying, all right, South, you're not going to get to count. If you're not letting your slaves actually act like citizens, then you shouldn't count them like they're citizens. And the South is saying, yeah, but, we should count them all. And so what they did is they came up with a compromise that basically each slave would count a little more than half as a person for representation in the House and for taxation. You need to know, though, that no matter what, they did not have any rights. They may have been counted as people, but they were not treated as people. The other thing that they create is the Electoral College, and for us, for multiple choice, all you need to know is that it's how the president is elected. They do sometimes ask about how could we change the Electoral College, because sometimes there have been times when the popular vote, the vote of the people, comes out with a different result than the Electoral College. The only way to change the Electoral College or to change the House or the Senate or anything that's actually written in the Constitution is via amendment. You could only do it through an amendment. A law is not going to do it. You need to actually change the Constitution. So eventually they ratify the Constitution, and to get everyone on board, they had a problem with the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists were pro-Constitution. They say, good job. The Anti-Federalists, they're still worried. They have that same worry that happened under the Articles, and they say, the only way we'll ratify, the only way we'll approve the Constitution is if you add a Bill of Rights. And so they did. All right, so the Constitution is broken up into 3 branches. By the way, we have those same 3 branches here in New York State. We have them in ours, in Beacon. We have them everywhere, all right? But we're talking specifically about the Constitution. So we have the legislative, executive, and judicial. All right, so the legislative branch. Now, you notice I have the multiple choice starry mixed star pants here. But I do have to tell you, these are good things to know for essays too. It's just you tend to see the ideas of these kind of more applied to multiple choice. So we have the legislative branch. It makes the laws. The legislative branch for our national government is Congress. The legislative branch for New York State is the New York State legislature. So we have Congress, the national government, and it's broken up into the House of Representatives and the Senate. And you notice I keep mentioning New York State because sometimes for fun, the Regent says, hey, you are from New York, you should know. So we have the New York State legislature, that's our legislative, and it's broken into the Assembly and the State Senate. But more often, they'll ask about the national government being Congress, House of Reps, and the Senate. So the House of Representatives is the lower house, meaning that they're less prestigious. They serve a 2-year term, so every 2 years they're up for re-election. They were, and still are, directly elected by the people. And so what they ask is, a lot of the time they'll say, hey, why did they say revenue bills should start, or any kind of bill dealing with money should start in the House of Reps? And they'll say, oh, because they're closest to the people. Why are they closest to the people? Because back when they wrote the Constitution, or the framers of the Constitution, the authors of the Constitution, that's the only one that was directly elected by the people. It wasn't the president, it wasn't the Senate, it was only the House. And because they have the 2-year term, so they're closer to the people. The Senate, on the other hand, is the upper house. They're more prestigious. They have a 6-year term. They have more job duties as well. They have to ratify or approve treaties. They have to approve presidential appointments. And it isn't until the 17th Amendment during the Progressive Era when they allow for the direct election of senators. So again, remember that prior to this, there was state legislatures that elected them. All right, next we have the executive branch, and they enforce the laws. And so our president is part of the executive branch, as well as the vice president, as well as their cabinet, and all the different government agencies that fall under the executive branch. Because the president... Good afternoon. I love you announcements. So anyway, any of the different agencies, the president, President Obama doesn't go around and write traffic tickets. He needs people to enforce the laws. So you've got all kinds of government agencies like the FBI, the CIA, the DEC, by the way, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Central Intelligence Agency, Department of Environmental Conservation, and the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, or ATF. And these are just a few of them. There's so many more. So the president has a bunch of powers, including the power to veto. Basically, Congress can make a law, and the president can say, hello, Belle. The president can say, nope, I don't want to do that. We're going to talk about what Congress can do in a second. They can appoint ambassadors, diplomats, judges, cabinet members. They get to make treaties. Remember, the Senate is the one that's going to ratify or approve those treaties. They can grant pardons. They're known as the chief diplomat, so dealing with other countries. The chief legislator, they're suggesting laws to Congress to pass. They are the head of state. They represent our country, and they're commander-in-chief of the military. Today, by Constitution, they only serve 2 terms. But initially, this was Washington's precedent that he set for future presidents. That he was president for 2 terms, he went home and died. Then the next guy runs, well, actually, the next guy only won one time, but the next guy, Thomas Jefferson, goes 2 times, goes home and dies. And that kept happening until FDR. When FDR ran once, he ran twice, he ran 3 times, ran 4 times. And so after that, they do the 22nd Amendment saying, nope, you can't run any more than that. So again, the Regents tries to trick you up with this. Remember that if they say originally, then it's Washington's precedent. If they're talking about modern times, the reason why the president is only elected twice or can only be elected twice, it's an amendment to the Constitution. Do you need to memorize that it's the 22nd? No, just as long as you know there's an amendment. All right, the judicial branch, they interpret the laws. So honestly, that's the biggest thing you need to know for multiple choice. For essays, you might need to know some of this other stuff, that they'll settle conflicts or disputes between different states, between the state and national government, between states and foreign countries, between individuals and the national government. The big case you have to know is Marbury versus Madison, which established the principle of judicial review, meaning that the court has the ability to decide whether a law is constitutional or not. We'll talk so much more about that later. There's 2 Chief Justices you need to know for the Regents. We've got Chief Justice John Marshall. He expanded the power of the national government. And again, we'll talk more about that and what it means in our Supreme Court review. And you also have Chief Justice Earl Warren. He expanded civil rights and the rights of the accused. We'll talk more about that later too. Our last thing for this is talking about checks and balances. And the reason why we have checks and balances is to make sure that one branch does not become more powerful than another branch. So you might want to pause this and really kind of look at it. But basically, you know, the legislative branch, they can make the laws. But the executive branch, they can veto them. But then the legislative branch can override those laws. But then you could have that whole system where the law is actually made, but it's unconstitutional, so the judicial branch can rule that to be unconstitutional. The judicial branch can also say that things from the executive branch are unconstitutional. All right, folks, so this is a good place for us to stop. We'll talk more later.